Well, LCR, if you see me standing here, it's because I'm not here, even though I'm here. But I will be back in the office tomorrow. I'm coming back from vacation today. And so this is a message that we have pre-recorded so that you can have the word from the gospel this morning. I want to thank Pastor Brad for filling in last week and for giving our family time to be away. We're also very excited for Michelle to begin her ministry, and a reminder that next week we will be gathering to officially install her and also do a blessing of the backpack. So if you have your school stuff, anything from your school that you want to bring for blessing, we will do a special blessing on that Sunday. Well, were you to come into my office, you would see on one of the shelves a little red book. And it's a collection of inscriptions of old epitaphs and from tombstones in the ancient world, especially ancient Rome. And one of them I've printed out to read to you. So this was found on an old roadside memorial. "My eyes were wet with tears, our little dog, when I bore you to the grave. So, Patricus, never again shall you give me 1,000 kisses. Never can you be contentedly in my lap. In sadness I have buried you, and you deserve this. In a resting place of marble I have put you for all time by the side of my shade. In your quality, sagacious though you were, like a human being, ah me, what a love companion we have lost." So as you heard in that reading, that was actually an inscription for someone's pet. And we have from all over the ancient world these memorials and these epitaphs to people's favorite dogs. It's a reminder that the people of the ancient world, especially in the time of the Romans, were as interested in their dogs and their pets as we are. Go to any Huntington Beach park or go walking early in the morning, and you will find one of the main ways to socialize is to walk your dog or to take it to the park or to meet other people doing the same. Now, when you look at ancient Roman writers, they actually wrote quite a bit on this topic, and a dog like this, who got a very exorbitant and elaborate tombstone, was more of an extravagant pet. So there were those exotic dogs that were treated very well. In fact, there were times that the Emperor Augustus would complain about how well some Romans treated their dogs, and he felt they should be focused on other things, but it was what it was. But then you also have a whole body of Roman literature dedicated to guard dogs. Maybe you've seen some of the mosaic tiles from Pompeii and other places, and they'll have a large black dog and black mosaic tile, and it says, "Cave Canem," beware of dog. So those yard signs and those fence signs, they're not anything new. In fact, they would put a picture of the dog on there, saying, "Beware of the dog if you come into this house." The Romans liked to have black dogs for guard dogs because they said they're easy to see during the day and fearsome they're hard to see at night. And that gives them some stealth. And indeed, some of the rules and etiquette around these guard dogs we see in a place like Pompeii. There's another class of dogs the Romans would write about too, and those were sheepdogs. Those were the dogs that would be brought out to care for the flocks, and they said, you want a good, strong sheepdog. If any of you has ever seen a mastiff, these were some of the dogs they used. They need them to be strong enough to kill a wolf. And so these dogs had a very key role in protecting the assets of the sheep and even the life of the shepherd from the danger of predators. Now you might say, why is Pastor Pike reading about Roman epitaphs to dogs and talking about guard dogs and talking about sheepdogs? Well, if you listen to the gospel this morning, it's that one text where Jesus calls a woman a dog. This oftentimes makes preachers uncomfortable, and they say, Jesus must have had a bad day. Well, maybe Jesus' blood sugar was low that day. Maybe Jesus didn't just like her, or maybe it was the social context in which he lived, relating men to women. But I need you to think very carefully where Jesus calls this woman a dog, because we will find out that, like these ancient writers, she is more valuable that way, especially when Jesus talks about the children of Israel. And she understands exactly what Jesus is saying, and she says, Jesus, I'm very happy to play this role if it means I get to eat what you've brought into the world. Now, one of the reasons we can say this is Jesus is in the region of Tyre and Sidon. These are two coastal cities that you can still visit, at least the ruins of today. Obviously, they were very wealthy because they were at the center of a significant trade. They were connected to the Phoenicians, and in fact, they had a colony that was known as Carthage that had been a thorn in the Roman side. They were also famous for farming these snails that they would get a kind of purple color from, and they would take hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of snails and produce purple cloth, and that's one reason why purple was so expensive. But the fact that it was expensive, these are cities that were vastly or incredibly wealthy and had vast resources. But that's not the biblical story I want you to remember this morning. I want you to think about another story, another woman from this same region, one who was chosen by God to be a special provider of bread, a special provider of small portions of bread to God's prophet Elijah. You may remember when there was famine in the land, Elijah had to leave his own people because there was no one that God could trust or use to live in a kind of faithful, miraculous giving of bread. Every day the bread would be refilled, the bread and the oil. Every day there would be new bread. Every day Elijah, the widow, and her son would eat, and it was an incredible act of faith that this very vulnerable person would in fact be able to give to someone else, not only just keep it for herself and her son. The widow at Zarephath, and Zarephath is right near Tyre and Sidon. You remember that Jesus himself talks about her. He says, this woman, she had more faith than the people of Israel, and so she's one of the reasons that God had to go outside of Israel because he couldn't find anyone in his family to do the work. And it's a reminder to us, just because we bear the name, just because we have the sign of the cross, just because we have the address and keys to the church, doesn't mean that when God calls, we'll be the ones who are willing to answer. Like the widow at Zarephath, or like this canine friend that Jesus meets today, there are faithful people outside the church that God can depend on when God can't depend on us. And this will be an important prayer that we can offer. God, may we have the same faith they had. This is just to show you that your credentials don't really matter, how long you've belonged to a church or where you attend or how much of the Bible you know or how much money you give. These things are not significant when it comes to God saying, I need you to give the rest of the flour, the rest of the oil, the rest of the bread, and don't worry, I'll take care of you once you've done that. The act of faith, the act of taking a risk on behalf of the gospel, this is something very difficult. And it's a reminder that sometimes God will call you to do that. God will call you to take what little you have. Just like that story we heard a couple weeks ago about the loaves and the fish, God will take that little you have and by God's blessing, multiply it. This might be a time for you to think, what little thing do I have that God could use? In that case, it was to feed Elijah. In this case, those crumbs are falling off the table from God to this woman. Now, what do I mean that she is a blessed dog or a good dog, or that it's a compliment from Jesus, especially thinking of the widow at Zarephath? Well, it's important because which one of those dogs is she? She's not one of the exotic dogs that someone's going to write a marble epitaph for. She's also not one of the dogs that someone's going to write Cave Canem, beware of dog, in this mosaic. Rather, she's a sheepdog. Now, how do we know this? She's a sheepdog because Jesus says very clearly, why would I take what is meant for the lost sheep and feed it to the dogs? And that's the key to this story. Jesus calls his people sheep, and if you're not one of his sheep, but you're somehow part of his story, part of his mission, you might have a different job, and in this case, she's the sheepdog. Now think about what it is that Jesus says about his own sheep. He says they are lost. I'm here to gather and feed the lost sheep of Israel. And the word that's used there doesn't just mean lost, like, well, they're misplaced. He means they're lost, like almost consigned to hell. They are so lost that they have nowhere to go and no chance of finding their way. They will have to be found. Notice how fixated Jesus is on the mission that he has. He's fixated on bringing the sheep back to the fold. This is what makes our salvation such a gift. Not that you somehow have it together. Again, it's not a question of your religious credentials. It's a question of Jesus saying, I am intent on bringing home my lost sheep. You're one of those sheep. You're one of those people who belong. And maybe you've gathered in the church this morning and you say, well, I don't know if that's me. Well, fine. Then maybe like this woman, you will be the sheepdog. If you understand what he's brought, you won't care how you get the food. That's why she doesn't protest. She doesn't say, how dare you? How dare you call me a dog? You Jewish men are all the same. I should have known. I shouldn't have come to you. Why does she come to Jesus in the first place? She comes to Jesus in the first place because this sheepdog has a very sick pup. She has a child who's being oppressed by a demon, and she knows that her own strength, even if she's strong enough to take on a wolf, is not going to be enough to heal her child. Any of you who've ever had a sick child, any of you who've ever lived with a child with a chronic illness, you know the same feeling of powerlessness, what it means to have no strength to bring about a cure. She comes to Jesus because she says, here is a shepherd that can fight off the wolf when the sheepdog isn't strong enough. I notice Jesus doesn't say, and you're not going to get anything, and there aren't going to be fragments left. He says, there will be crumbs falling from the table. This is a constant source of enmity or difference of opinion in our house, whether you can feed a dog from the table. I insist to my wife that, in fact, we should feed our dogs from the table like a kind of medieval lord. She feels it's only encouraging their bad behavior. But I have a feeling that Jesus isn't just waiting for the crumbs to drop. I have a feeling Jesus is dropping this food, waiting for the sheepdog to eat it. She knows the gift he brings. She knows the life he has, and she will take it however she can get it, trusting that finally there is someone stronger than this illness, stronger than this demonic oppression. Now, Jesus doesn't say, well, okay, let's see what happens if you take it. Jesus says, go. Her faith has been effective. And her faith is not in herself. It is not in her canine strength. It is not in a sign that says, beware of dog. It is not even a kind of monument to sadness bearing some kind of epitaph. Her faith is a belief that the one who brings this bread, this good shepherd, he can handle the wolves, he can handle the demons, he can handle the death, he can handle demons, he can handle the world. One of the things I want to leave you with today before I'm back in town is the idea that this one who came to give you bread, he's not even dropping the crumbs from the table, he is feeding you with himself. This is the gift of Holy Communion. He's feeding you with the sacrament of life. This is the gift that you'll receive very soon in the service. And he is strong enough for whatever ails you, whether it's a sickness, whether it's a kind of influence of evil, whether it's even your death itself. He will be able to shepherd you in that place where no one can go but him. And then he will bring us to the place where we will all meet again. And we will realize that we are part of the flock. And we may be surprised to find out that there are sheepdogs from other places and people who knew exactly who he was and believed in him. And they'll be part of the story too. Only because our shepherd is so good and his bread is so powerful, the gift of his life. He knows you, he loves you. You are part of his flock, and I hope that you live in that power and that gift. Amen.